phone, it can be whatever you want it to be. And I'd like you to go to m.socrative.com. Or if you have the app, you can go to the student app. We're going to do what I call a concept check. What a concept check does is it finds out how much you already know about something. Okay? So we're talking lower order thinking skills. What do I understand? What do I know? What do I remember? So I kind of want to find out where all of you are. So you could go to m.socrative.com, and you're going to go to the Rosen room. And I'm going to set this up here.
I was there yesterday and you weren't there.
You're right, I wasn't. I'm going to go into the teacher one. And I'm going to start something called the space race. And let me sit for a minute so I can see what I'm looking at. I'm going to select my flip it concept check. We'll say, well, let's go to 3 teams in here. And
I'm sorry, I just got in. Could you back up a little bit? M.Socrative.
yeah, go to m.socrative.com
Got it.
and the Rosen room.
Oh,
Okay, when it asks you for a room. Is everybody there?
Rosen.
Okay. The Rosen, when it says for room, Rosen, that's it. And just say join room. I want everybody to be in the room before I click start.
It's probably not going to happen.
Yep, you're waiting for me.
Okay.
That's fine.
It's not going to happen. I'm having trouble.
Do you want to work with somebody else? You can. The 2 of you can work together and come up with the answers. How's that? All right. Uh-oh, what happened to our screen?
It logged me out for a second. I'm not sure why.
Okay. I'll get back on. All right. So it should say like waiting for instructor or something like that right now. Once he brings me back up here, I'm going to click the start button. And what it's going to do is you're going to get some questions. You're going to be automatically assigned to a team, one of 3 teams. You don't know who else in this room is on your team. Okay? And you're going to try and answer the questions to the best of your ability. And for each question that you get right, it came up for a second and then it went away.
Yeah.
You'll see a rocket moving across the screen for your team. Okay? So, should I just go with the side screens for now?
Yes.
Do that?
Sorry.
Okay. All right. So, go.
Now it says enter your name.
Okay. So when it says enter your name, you can put your name in or you can put a pseudonym or whatever you want to put. And then it'll start asking me some questions. And we got some bicycles going across the screen for every right answer.
Woo! Go team green.
That would be lime. Ooh, lime and blue or, oh, blue's ahead.
So we're hot. How do you know? The top, the color. I think you're.
Okay, so we have blue and lime have made it all the way across at this point. So the point of this being up on the screen for your students is they obviously want to win. There's that certain competitiveness, yet they have no idea who's on their team, so they don't know who they're helping or not helping, right? But what it does for me, and the reason why concept checks are important, is it helps me to know what I need to teach. What is it that my students understand well, and what do they have difficulty with? So once this is done, I click Finish. If you look on your side screens, I know you can't see it up front right now. And then I can get reports. I can view a chart. So if I get the reports, I can download what you just did.
And this is free?
This is all free.
Yeah. And will the names of the students
Yes.
be on the...
Yeah, so then I know who in particular has difficulty.
It's free up to how many students learn?
50, I think it said.
Yeah, probably.
And do you have to be in a classroom like this, or?
No, you can. I can set it up as a quiz that you could take at home, or you could do it like this in class to check on where they are. Let's see. So let me make this a little bit bigger if I can. So what this shows me is that everybody, you can kind of see how everybody did and where they struggled, okay?
I want to reflect and read the questions and not be on a race and learn.
So you can do it just as a quiz.
Yeah.
And that's how I would do it if I have my students doing it at home, which is usually when you do what this concept check idea is usually something you do at home. I like the space race for in class because the students think it's really cool to watch and you can, I chose bicycles because I biked here, but there's rockets and spaceships and you can choose what your little animal is that's going to go across the screen from about 5 of them. What's that?
I was like really competitive.
Right, and that's why it's fun to, so you can do this, you can have them doing it outside of class, but there's also the inside of class kind of thing for just that background knowledge idea of getting them going. You can get from that. So the point of a concept check, as I said earlier, is it kind of checks for lower order thinking skills. My goal in here today is to help you to be able to define what flipped learning really is, and to be able to choose from a variety of technologies. So there's that long list of technologies. You'll know what each of them does, like I can walk you through it, or actually I think it's written on the sheet. So there isn't one way to do it. There's lots of different ways, depending on what it is that you're teaching, or the people that you're working with, what they're teaching. I work with languages primarily, though this works for all disciplines. And the courses that I work most closely with for the UW are distance courses. They're taught in a blended format with two-way interactive video conferencing as the primary mode of instruction. So they'll have a classroom of students on one UW campus and a classroom of students on another, with one instructor teaching to multiple campuses at the same time, as well as incorporating a lot of outside things. And it looks like all of my screens just went down. Except, okay, this one's still good. Thank goodness. And I also want you to be able to understand why flipped learning is beneficial to your students and to you as an instructor. So I was talking about the lower order thinking skills. Does anybody know what this is? It's Bloom's taxonomy flipped upside down. And the idea is that students, so you hear people say it's so you can do your homework in class and your coursework outside of class. That's not really what it is. It's about lower order thinking skills that students don't need your support on being done outside of class. And you being the supportive instructor, helping them with the creating, the evaluating, the analyzing, those higher order thinking skills in class where they need your support. As opposed to you've taught them a concept in class and they go home and they try and apply it and they're confused and they don't remember what happened in class and they have to try and relearn it on their own. It switches that so that you really have more time with your students focusing on the hard parts while they're in class. For us in languages, what it has done is it's allowed us to have more time for students to actually create with the language and personalize their learning, because they get to a point where they can actually be using it in a broader picture as opposed to just conjugating verbs, so that they can go home and try and write with them or something. Okay? So for us, it's been really great that way. We started doing this in our courses because of a few things. One, we were finding that instructors were using too much English in class while they were explaining difficult grammatical structures and concepts, and we wanted to get the English out of class. Our students, oftentimes, we're doing Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, Russian, and Hmong in the program that I'm directing, and those students aren't getting the opportunity really to speak those languages except for the 50 minutes that they're in class. So we really want to capitalize on using the language in context during class time. And then outside of class, they can be doing the kinds of things that are understanding, remembering, learning, maybe listening to the English explanations of something, that sort of thing, where the English is outside and the language itself is inside. We also find that students come in at varying levels. Some of them have had some language study before they come to us, some of them have not. This gives us an opportunity to differentiate and really know what it is that they actually know before they come to class, and build off of that and sort of individualize the instruction. It also allows them as learners to individualize their learning. So if you're thinking about the lower order thinking skills, the understanding and remembering, some students get it right away. Other students need a lot of repetition and a lot of study and all of that. By having them do that learning outside of class, they can review the concepts, the videos, as many times as they need to until they understand it. And they can do those concept checks outside of class as many times as they need to until they understand it. So some people only need to do it once, and other kids may need to do it 10 times. The other thing about that is when it comes to a test, an exam, they can go back and they can review those. You can't stop and start rewind your instructor when they're standing in front of you. And the students typically don't remember on right before the semester exam what they did in the first 2 weeks of class because it was so long ago. This way they can actually go back and review those concepts very clearly. So it gave us that opportunity. And oftentimes with languages, because if you were teaching those lower order thinking skills in class, you weren't getting to the fun activities of actually applying those concepts because some kid was getting tripped up on the concept itself during class. So by having them learn that outside, it gave us more time to actually get to the fun interactive activities that we were never getting to in our lessons. From a student's perspective, they were having trouble with the homework because they would go home and they'd be like, I know she taught us this, but now I don't really remember how it works, and they'd get frustrated. So by having that piece outside of class, they were able to review it in their own way. And back to that idea of not being able to rewind a teacher, now they can if they have it on video. Once we started flipping our classrooms, the students were able to choose to learn however they wanted to. So we would give them the video support, we would give them their textbooks, whatever. It didn't matter. It doesn't matter to us how they learn it. It just matters that they learn it. So whatever they needed to do to learn the concepts and then take a concept check to verify what they know and don't know, that was the important part. Okay, so it didn't matter how they got there. And there were a number of different ways that they did that. The concept checks that we have come in a variety of formats, and I'm going to show you some data from Desire to Learn, since I know how many of you are using D2L? Most of you? Okay. So we have been using that for a lot of it. So all of those other tools that you have on your handout, you may not need or want to go there, and that's okay, because you can do it all in Desire to Learn. And that's kind of why this particular session is not focused on one tool, because there's a million different ways you can do it depending on your content and how you would want to apply it. But the concept checks in Desire to Learn do allow you to do them multiple times, and you can say they get 5 tries or they get 3 tries or however, or infinite number of tries, however many that you want based on your content area. And then the preparation outside of class allowed them to actually apply those concepts to their own life, which for us in languages is really important so that it becomes meaningful, because when they go overseas or even work in a place in this country with people who speak whatever language it is that they're learning, to be able to actually talk about themselves was kind of the key. This is what D2L looks like for concept check. So here, the students were given a concept check. We see their overall score. What's most interesting, though, is when you can look at it by question. Okay? So you get this data, and you can see that question number 3 was a difficult one. Question number 1 was not. So I don't need to go back and teach the whole concept, but I can focus on the parts that were difficult. And I can dig even deeper and see that most students got it wrong because they were choosing this answer. Okay, this is in Russian. And I can look at this answer and I can say, oh, so that's where their confusion is specifically, and I can address that. One of the biggest mistakes that teachers make when it comes to flipping lessons is that they go back and they reteach everything. And what the students learn is, I don't need to learn it at home because she's going to come back and reteach it. But by having a concept check, you can focus in on just the parts that were particularly difficult. And it also gives the students an opportunity to ask better questions because they know more about their own knowledge. They know their own confusion.
Is this a particular app in D2L? Or
This is just the quizzing feature in it's just the quizzing within D2L. Yep, nothing fancy at all.
So this is something that's come up in other presentations just with classrooms. how do you prepare students for a classroom experience? Like, because it does take a different mentality, I think.
Right.
And that's something that I think we struggle with, is that students, you can kind of tell when they come into the classroom, they're just like, you get blank stares, and it's like, that some of the content was in the flipped, experience. And so my question is that part of that kind of, switching their mentality on it, or what you do, or?
Yeah, it is a switch in mentality.
Right.
We give them typically some kind of a checklist for their homework of what they need to do, so they know exactly what they need to do to prepare for being ready in class.
Okay.
Our class time does allow for them to ask questions, but what we find is that their questions are much more specific, and they really know what they're asking, whereas in the past, if we said, okay, are there any questions on homework, and they just kind of look at you and they think, nope, I think I got it. And what was really happening is they went home, they filled the whole thing out, whatever it was, and they thought they did it right, but they actually did the whole thing wrong, and they didn't realize it. Okay? What the concept check does, because of the way it's digital, is it gives them immediate feedback as to what it is they don't understand, and it gives me, as the teacher, immediate feedback on where the confusion specifically lies. So we're actually able to address better what they know and don't know. And typically, that checklist, and I've actually got some quotes from students, but and I can't remember if that's right away next. Let's see. Not quite. I'm going to get to some student quotes that'll tell you a little bit about what they are thinking, because it is overwhelming at first until they get used to it, for sure. So this is kind of what I was just saying about the concept checks, really revealing what it is, the concepts that students don't understand, those misconceptions very specifically. And it allowed us to have better interactions in class because we knew what they did and didn't know, and they also knew better what they did and didn't know. So we could address it a little bit easier. This is just kind of some data that we collected, the components, and all of this you can look at more closely because the slides are up on the web page. But the components are the different tools, I guess you could say, that they had to work with in terms of how they could learn, and then how often they used it, and whether or not they felt it improved their learning. Some of the most interesting things, they really liked the video explanations. The being able to rewind, this was huge. To be able to go back, because you can't rewind a lecture that you're sitting and listening to, right? If it's not recorded, you can't go back to it. So having this really helped them also on their midterms and finals, because they could go back to the concepts that they were finding most difficult, and then the concept checks. So those were the things that we found were most useful, and that we definitely had to keep those in when we were doing them. A lot of people do flip learning where they just put their lectures online. Well, you still don't know whether or not the students understood it if you hadn't done some kind of a check to find out. So that makes it no different from a regular classroom lecture. So here's some student quotes. One student described it as this constant stream of work, but they felt that that was necessary to really learn the language. And they're right in that they were finding at the end of the semester, or the end of the quarter even, that they were really able to speak and use the language. And we're talking languages that are classified, they're like class 4 languages, which means it takes an extraordinary amount of time because there's not so much connection to the English language for language learners. Like, some of the Romance languages, Spanish, Italian, French, there's enough connection there that they're expected to be more fluent than you would be in the same amount of time of Chinese. But they were actually, pushing the limits there, which was great. At first, it's a lot to get used to. So getting back to your question, it's a lot to get used to, not only for the students, but also for the instructor, because it does take time to plan those. But once you've done them, you have them forever, okay? And you also don't have to be the one who creates all the content. So you can record yourself, and we'll get to tools in just a minute. You can record yourself, or you can find things that are already out there about your discipline that work for you. I have one Japanese instructor who's not yet made a single video for her class because somebody else has already done the different grammatical concepts for Japanese. So she just picks and chooses. She makes sure they're short. So absolutely no longer than 10 minutes. Probably 5 to 8 is better because students' level of concentration is not that long. And the other thing is you don't want to teach too many concepts at once. So it'd be better to break down your concepts into individualized lectures about each concept rather than having a lecture with 5 concepts in it and expecting the students to get all of them. After each one, your concept check could be 3 questions. It doesn't have to be a long quiz. It can just be a few things to make sure they get the main ideas. So breaking it down into smaller chunks to make it more manageable for your students is a really important piece of that as well.
Question on this
Yeah.
one. It says as suggested, enough time to complete the steps as suggested. Do you give them a recommended amount of time that this activity will take 15 minutes, this activity will take 45 minutes, or?
I think
Or is
I
it-
haven't done that because the videos are short enough that it kind of controls that. And then there's the student who wants to go back. What I think that's referring to more is the checklist that we have. And going through and saying, okay, did this part, now I did this part, and just giving them a guide because they are working on their own. Giving them some kind of a checklist guide of all the pieces that they should do. Just that extra structure, I think, helps them sort of figure that out.
I've been involved in a class where they did that though.
Yeah.
Where they actually gave time limits.
No, they didn't give time limits, they said, here's the activity you're gonna do, expect this amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
I found it not accurate.
They're not accurate as how much they would do,
And
or?
I was like, why do this? Because if you have someone who takes longer at the activity,
Right.
then it makes them feel
Like they're,
like they're slow, and maybe they are slower, maybe they'd like to take their time with it, but
I'm thinking for the student who's like, oh, got half an hour before class, I better quick do this thing, and I look at it and it says, recommended time 45 minutes or whatever, just to give them a sense of, plus that whole two hours per credit hour sort of thing, just so you can measure it out yourself and say, all right, I'm
Right.
giving them this much time.
But I think you're right, there is a lot of individuality.
Yeah.
right. And that's what this allows for.
Right.
Students can differentiate for themselves and learn it how they need to, taking as much or as little time as they want.
right.
And
But still going through the checklist to make sure that they did all of the things that they needed to do. Yeah.
Would it maybe it makes sense then to put like a minimum time, like allow yourself at least X
Yeah.
amount of time, so that if it takes longer, you're sort of telling them it's going to probably take longer, but you should at least allot a half hour to do this or whatever to do this, so they don't get interrupted or don't have to go to class or.
I guess I'm just curious why micromanage their, well, to me, that's micromanaging.
Yeah.
And I think I want my students to be responsible. I don't wanna tell them, you let this alone, this is gonna take you, I
Right.
don't wanna plan I want them to plan. So I don't like it.
I think there's a lot of shepherding involved, but I think in the end, they're a better student. But I agree with you. They have to figure, you give them the parameters, then they have to grow within those parameters themselves. Or not grow, but it shows at the end.
So maybe that's something you do at the beginning, just to get them, because I mean, if you've never done it before, you have no idea.
Right.
Right.
But then after that, they can plan for themselves, so they
Yeah.
know how to.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with that. We struggle with that in the libraries, and we give them kind of an online. We have a series of modules that we give them online in the classroom, and it's difficult because we just don't know how much time, and most of the time they're not spending a lot of time on it as much as we would like them to. And they come into class and they're saying, where was this in the module? It's like it's in there, but you just need to spend a certain amount of time in each module, probably more than you're spending. You know, and it's hard because you're right. I mean, there's some students that come in and they might get it in a very short amount of time, but there's some students that are frankly skimming and they just don't. And so that's the reality that we face.
Right.
And,
That's
it's,
their
and so
choice.
that's the
Right.
challenge that we face because it's like, you know, the goal of this is to take ownership of your education. But if they're not really, you know, there's a balance as an instructor. How much is that on you and how much is that on the student?
Right. So that, I guess that's where I really like the concept check, because they can go back. It gives them immediate feedback so they know whether or not they knew it, or, you know, they got the right answer. Or, well, it doesn't give them the answer. It gives them, like, the one that you did, it gives them feedback on something meaningful. And they can go back and redo it until they get it, if they choose to do that. Or if it's a student that's taking the course just because they need a credit, they may not go back as many times. But that's not going to be any different whether they're in a flipped learning environment or a traditional one. So there's a certain point where they are college students and they do have to take that ownership of their learning. And if they don't want to learn it, regardless of what model you use for teaching, they're not going to learn it, right?
And I think that's the value of, like you mentioned, I just tell them, go back and do it again, or something like that.
Right.
Like, in class, I often go back to X module and then just redo it or revisit it. And I think that's the great part of the online,
Right.
the kind of
Flipped
Yeah.
approach. Okay, so the key concepts that I hope that you got in this brief part before we get to actually working on things is that it's really just flipping your approach to Bloom's taxonomy. It's not about where your homework is, and it does give you that more time to work on individual needs because you can focus on a specific student's difficulty or a specific area that the whole class finds difficult, and you know exactly where that area is because of the concept check. And it's not complicated. It doesn't require complicated technology. Most of you were already using Desire to Learn. That's where that data came from. So you could just use what you already have. However, if you want to try some other things, let's go to the page here. So let me make this a little bit bigger.